he did not lower his voice. That was the thing she would remember most. Not the words themselves, though the words were precise and deliberate and designed to remove any remaining ambiguity about what she was to him now. Not the presence of the other woman. Though she stood there with her hand on his arm and her coat folded over the back of the chair like she had always belonged in these rooms. Not the concierge watching from behind the desk, the same man who had called her Mrs. Wittmann with genuine warmth for 7 years and who was now studying the middle distance with the careful neutrality of someone who understood that what he was witnessing was not his to interfere with. What she remembered most was that he did not lower his voice. He spoke at full volume in the marble lobby of the building they had shared, and he said what he had come to say, and he did not consider, or did not care, who heard him. And Imani Wittmann stood there pale, one hand on the strap of a small bag, and heard every word, and said nothing. What Cedric Wittmann did not know, what he could not have known, was that 3 hours earlier, at 9:17 in the morning, Imani's phone had rung. A New York number, a senior partner at a firm she had never heard of, a name she had not heard spoken aloud in 11 years, and a sentence that had reorganized the entire structure of her life in the time it takes to confirm your identity to a stranger. He left believing he had removed a burden. He left believing the timing was his. And he left believing that the woman standing in the marble lobby with her small bag and her silence had nowhere to go and nothing to go to. He was wrong about all three. This is the story of Imani Wittmann, of what was done to her, of what she had already built before it was done, of what she built after, and of the specific, quiet, absolute completeness of what followed. Stay until the end, not for the revenge, for the transformation. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before the illness, before the lobby, before the morning that divided her life into two distinct and irreconcilable halves, Imani Carter Wittmann had been the kind of woman who was difficult to define in a single sentence, not because she was complicated in the way that people use that word to mean difficult, because she was layered in the way that people who have been genuinely tested tend to be. She had grown up in Baltimore, the only child of a father who had worked for 31 years as a master electrician and a mother who had taught 3rd grade at the same elementary school for 28 years. They were not wealthy. They were not struggling. They were the particular kind of stable that comes from two people who have chosen their lives with intention and maintained them with discipline. Her mother had a phrase she used about certain people that Imani had grown up hearing and not fully understanding until she was older. She moves through rooms, her mother would say. Not she fills rooms. Not she commands rooms. Moves through. As though the person in question had a relationship with space itself that was different from most people's. Imani had understood at some point in her 30s that her mother had been describing her. She had a degree in healthcare administration from Howard University and a master's from Johns Hopkins that she had completed while working full-time at a regional hospital network in Baltimore, where she had been, by 29, the youngest operations director in the organization's history. She was not the loudest person in any meeting she attended. She was consistently the most prepared. She had met Cedric at a fundraising gala in Chicago when she was 32. And he was handsome and charming and spoke with the authority of someone who had never had reason to doubt his own instincts. He ran a boutique commercial real estate investment firm that was, in the years they were together, growing rapidly. He had pursued her with the specific, focused energy of a man who had identified what he wanted and was accustomed to obtaining it. She had been cautious. She had been cautious because she had spent enough time in rooms where decisions were made to recognize the difference between a man who was interested in her and a man who was interested in what she represented. Competence, composure, the particular social and professional credibility of a woman who moved through rooms. But Cedric had been patient. and patient men were rare enough that patience itself had become a form of persuasion. Ah, she had loved him. That part was real. The love had been real. The diagnosis came in year 4 of the marriage. It was not a single dramatic moment of revelation. It was the accumulation that she would later describe as a slow narrowing. Tests that led to more tests that led to language that had to be repeated before it could be absorbed. The condition was manageable. That was the word the specialists used, manageable, which meant it would require sustained attention, adjusted routines, and the particular psychological discipline of someone who has been told that the rest of their life will require more maintenance than they had planned for. Cedric had been present in the beginning. She would not deny this. He had driven her to appointments. He had held her hand in waiting rooms. And he had told people she was strong with the specific pride of someone who needed to be associated with strength. But as the months passed, and the condition proved itself to be not acute but chronic, not something that would resolve but something that would need to be managed indefinitely, she began to notice changes in him. Not dramatic changes, not cruelty, just distance. A kind of gradual withdrawal that expressed itself in delayed responses, in sighs she was not meant to hear, in the way he had stopped asking how she felt and started asking how her symptoms were, as though she had become a condition to be monitored rather than a person to be known. She had a friend named Dara. Dara had been her closest friend since their sophomore year at Howard and had the particular gift of saying difficult things without making them feel like attacks. Over lunch, a year into the diagnosis, Dara had set down her fork and looked at Imani directly. "He's already gone," she had said. Not in the dramatic way, in the quiet way, the way that's harder to prove and harder to leave. Imani had not responded immediately. "How long have you known?" she had asked finally. "I've been watching since your diagnosis," Dara replied. "I was hoping I was wrong." "Are you?" Dara had held her gaze. "I don't think so." That lunch had been 14 months before the lobby. In those 14 months, Imani had done 2 things simultaneously. She had continued to be the version of herself that the marriage required, present, composed, functional, at making the adjustments that the illness demanded without making them anyone else's burden. And she had begun, quietly and without announcement, to document. The documentation had started as a medical habit. She had always tracked her symptoms, her medication, her responses to treatment in a plain notebook she kept on her nightstand. The precision was not anxiety. It was the operational instinct of someone who had spent a decade managing complex systems and understood that data was always more reliable than memory. Then the habit expanded. Not dramatically. Not with a decision she could point to later and say, "This is the moment I knew." It expanded the way certain understandings expand. Gradually, in the spaces between sleep and waking, in the quiet hours when the apartment was dark and Cedric was somewhere else again, until she looked at what she had written and understood that she had been building something. Not a case. Not yet. But a record. A precise, undated, unembellished record of a marriage that was moving in a direction she had not chosen. The name arrived in fragments. That was how it always worked with Cedric. Not in announcements, not in confrontations. In traces. The residue of a life being built in parallel that he was not yet ready to fully commit to and not careful enough to fully conceal. A scent, first. Something floral and expensive that did not belong to Imani and had never been present in the apartment before. Faint but specific enough to register on the 2 occasions it appeared in the entryway on evenings when Cedric returned later than he had said he would, then a charge on their shared account. A restaurant in River North that Cedric had once described as too performative for regular use. Then another, same week, different address, same neighborhood, then a gallery event, then a valet charge, then a boutique hotel bar. Not a charge large enough to demand explanation, but regular enough to form a pattern to anyone paying attention. Imani was paying attention. She had always paid attention. The illness had intensified this. When the body slows, the mind compensates. She had more time now than she once had, and she had used it in the way she had always used available time, to observe, to document, to understand. The name came from an email, not a dramatic mistake. Cedric was too careful for dramatic mistakes. He relied instead on the accumulation of small carelessnesses, each one individually deniable, which together formed something impossible to misread. He had forgotten to delete a forwarded message from a shared device. The email itself was professional, a charity committee, a media strategy luncheon. The name in the signature was Simone Clark. 2 days later, a charge appeared for a hotel bar where the same committee had held a reception. A week after that, a florist charge, premium arrangement, no card listed, same district. Imani wrote the name down. Simone Clark. She did not circle it, did not underline it, did not give it any visual weight that might communicate to her own instincts that this was a moment of crisis. She wrote it as she wrote everything else, plainly, and turned the page. She saw Simone for the first time by accident. Cedric had told her he had a client dinner in the suburbs. Imani's specialist had rescheduled at the last minute, and the car that Cedric's office usually arranged had been unavailable, so she had ordered one herself and made the trip downtown earlier than anticipated. The car was moving through traffic near the river when it paused at a red light beside the terrace of a private hotel lounge. Imani was not looking for Cedric. She was watching the movement of staff through the glass, the habit of someone who had spent years observing how organizations functioned. When she saw him, he was standing near the entrance with a woman. Simone Clark was younger than Imani had imagined, though not dramatically. She was polished in the specific way of someone who had worked to cultivate an appearance of effortlessness. Her coat was cream, and her posture suggested long practice in being noticed without appearing to require it. She was smiling at something Cedric had said. It was not a wide smile. It was narrower, precise, the smile of a woman confirming something rather than discovering it. Then she touched his wrist. Cedric leaned toward her when she spoke. Not the lean of a distracted man, the lean of a man relieved. The light changed. The car moved. Imani did not turn around to keep watching. Back home, she sat in the chair by the window and waited for her breathing to steady. The fatigue arrived as it always did after emotional shocks. First the heaviness in her limbs, then the tremor low in her hands, then the ache in her chest that was not physical but resided there anyway. She opened the notebook, wrote the date and time, Hotel Terrace, Cedric with Simone Clark. A comfortable body language. No hesitation. She closed the notebook. No tears. That more than anything else made the moment feel definitive. Not because she felt nothing, because what she felt had moved beyond surprise into recognition. The documentation sharpened after that, not from urgency, from clarity. She began tracking financial patterns with the same precision she had brought to operational management for a decade. Charges aligned with Cedric's stated whereabouts, inconsistencies between his calendar and his actual movements, a second phone that appeared twice and then disappeared, transfers from their joint account in amounts small enough not to trigger alerts, but regular enough to accumulate. She was not building toward confrontation. She was building toward understanding. Because understanding, complete, documented, verifiable understanding, was what she had always found most stabilizing in situations that others would have found destabilizing. One night, Cedric came home just before 10. He found her in the living room with a blanket over her legs and a folder open beside her. He looked almost startled to see her upright, alert, present. "You're still awake," he said. "I wasn't asleep," she replied. He loosened his coat, looked toward the kitchen. "Did you eat?" "Yes." A pause. "Then you should try to rest more." The sentence was structurally identical to care. It was not care. It was management, a preference for reduced visibility. He went to shower. When the bathroom door closed, Imani opened the notebook, added one line. Visible transfer from concealment to assumption. She sat with that sentence for a moment, then added another beneath it. He believes this is already over. Outside, wind moved against the windows. Inside, the distance between two people sharing the same apartment had already become something neither of them could cross. And Cedric, certain he was still controlling the timing, had no idea that the change had already begun, and had no idea what was already in motion on the other side of it. The call came at 9:17 in the morning. Imani was at the window with tea when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number, New York Exchange, corporate. Her instinct was to let it pass. Unknown calls had become associated with administration, insurance clarifications, billing loops, the endless procedural machinery of managing a chronic condition. Most of them required more energy than they returned, but something in the quality of the ring, steady and unhurried, held her attention just long enough. She answered on the fourth ring. Miss Carter. The voice was calm, precise, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had delivered important information many times and understood that the delivery itself was a form of respect. Imani paused at the name, Carter, her name before the marriage, the name on her degrees, her early professional records, the documents from a life that had predated Cedric Wittmann by 32 years. Yes, she said. My name is James Holloway. I'm a senior partner at Holloway & Associates in New York. I'm calling regarding the estate of Miss Vera Carter. The name landed differently than she expected. Not with shock, with the specific weight of something that has been absent for a very long time and has suddenly been returned. Vera Carter, her great-aunt and her mother's father's sister. A woman who had left Baltimore in 1971 and built a life in New York that the family had spoken of only in careful fragments, as though the full story was too large to manage in conversation. A woman Imani had met exactly 4 times in her life, the last time 11 years ago. I believe there may be some confusion, Imani said quietly. There is no confusion, James replied. His tone was gentle but precise. Miss Carter passed away 8 days ago. Her will names you as primary beneficiary. We have been attempting to reach you through previous contact information without success. Imani did not respond immediately. The room seemed to recalibrate around her, not in a dramatic way, in the specific way of a space in which the structural assumptions have shifted. I'll need to verify your identity formally, James continued. But before we proceed, I want to confirm I am speaking with Imani Marie Carter, born in Baltimore. Yes, she said. Thank you. A pause. I would like to arrange a secure meeting to review the contents of the will and initiate the transfer process. There are significant assets involved. How significant? The question was not disbelief. It was sequence. She had always needed to understand cause before she could absorb consequence. James chose his next words with the care of someone who had learned that numbers, delivered without context, produced reactions that were difficult to manage. Miss Carter's estate is valued at approximately $1.2 billion, he said. That includes controlling interest in Carter Medical Group, several real estate portfolios, and multiple trust structures. $1.2 billion. She did not repeat it. She did not question it. She sat with it for exactly the amount of time it required. Why me? She asked. Not from disbelief. From sequence. Miss Carter amended her will 9 years ago, James said. You were identified as her closest living relative with both legal standing and, he paused briefly, the temperament required to oversee what she built. Temperament. The word settled in her chest differently than the number had, because Vera Carter had been a builder. A woman who had left Baltimore with nothing and constructed something that outlasted every assumption anyone had made about what she could become. And she had looked at her great-niece 4 times, across 4 brief meetings, and decided that the temperament was the same. "I'll need time to review everything," Imani said. "Of course, we move at your pace." James paused. "I would strongly advise discretion. News of this nature tends to travel once formal filings begin." "I understand." She ended the call. The apartment was quiet. Cedric was at his office. Simone was wherever Simone was. The world outside the window continued without awareness of what had just occurred. Imani set her phone down, reached for the notebook, opened to a new section, wrote, "Call from Holloway and Associates, estate of Vera Carter, primary beneficiary." Beneath it, $1.2 billion, medical holdings, real estate, trusts. Then one final line, "Do not disclose." She closed the notebook. 3 hours later, Cedric came home unexpectedly. He was earlier than usual. His posture had the specific quality of someone who had been preparing to deliver something. And Imani, looking at him across the kitchen, I understood before he said a word what the rest of the morning would contain. She had not expected it today, but she had known it was coming. And now, for the first time in 14 months of quiet documentation, she was standing on ground that was not shrinking. She was standing on ground that was expanding. And Cedric had no idea. The apartment was unusually ordered when she entered the living space. Surfaces cleared, objects aligned. The specific stillness of a space that has been prepared not for guests, but for a decision already made. Cedric was already dressed, not in his work clothes, in something more deliberate, casual enough to appear unguarded, formal enough to signal intent. He turned when he heard her. "We should talk," he said. Not harsh, not raised, final. She inclined her head. "All right." He gestured toward the seating area but remained standing himself. This is not something he intends to settle into, she noted internally. She sat, not because he had gestured, because her body required it. Her hands folded loosely in her lap, her posture composed, her expression giving nothing away. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he began. She did not interrupt. "The situation isn't sustainable for either of us. You've been dealing with your condition." He chose the phrase with visible care, as though naming her illness directly might complicate his argument. "And I've tried to support that. But there comes a point where reality has to be acknowledged." "What reality?" she asked quietly. "That our lives are moving in different directions. That what you need and what I can realistically provide are no longer aligned. Aligned." Another word that simplified something more complex. "You mean I'm inconvenient?" she said. "Not an accusation, a clarification?" Cedric's expression shifted. Not in disagreement, in discomfort with the directness. "I'm saying this isn't working," he replied. "For you," she said. He did not answer immediately. The pause was brief, but it was enough. He moved to the counter where a folder had been placed. He brought it to the table and set it between them, though not close enough for her to touch without leaning forward. The positioning told her everything about what kind of conversation this was designed to be. "I've arranged temporary accommodations," he said. "A serviced apartment, medical access, transportation, everything you'll need, defined by him, determined without her. You can move today," he added. "Today. This property is under my name," he said, his jaw tightening slightly when she did not react. "It makes more sense for me to remain." "I see," she said. The sound of heels on marble interrupted the space. The front door opened. Simone Clark stepped inside with the ease of someone who had done this before. She paused only briefly when she saw Imani. Her expression did not shift into guilt. It shifted into calculation. "Am I early?" she asked. Her tone was light, controlled. No, Cedric said, moving slightly toward her. It's fine. And there it was. Not hidden, not denied, simply present. Simone removed her coat slowly and placed it over the back of a chair with the ease of someone who had already decided she belonged in this space. Imani watched the exchange, then looked back at Cedric. This was already decided, she said. He did not deny it. I didn't think prolonging it would help. Of course. There was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where Simone studied Imani more carefully, not with sympathy, with evaluation, measuring the gap between what she had expected and what she was seeing. Imani did not meet her gaze. Instead, she reached for the folder, opened it, reviewed the documents inside with the same attention she would have given a routine operational file, temporary lease, medical contacts, transportation schedule, everything arranged without her, everything decided before she was told. She closed the folder. I'll need my medical records, she said, my medications and a few personal items. Of course, Cedric said quickly, relief visible. I'll take care of that, Simone added, stepping forward. Imani looked at her then, for the first time. Not long, just enough. No, Imani said. You won't. The room stilled. Simone stepped back. Cedric cleared his throat. We don't need to. It isn't complicated, Imani said. I'll pack what I need. She rose slowly, walked past both of them, into the bedroom. She moved methodically, a small suitcase, her medication arranged in sequence, her documents, her notebook. She placed it inside with the same deliberate care she had given every entry it contained. When she returned to the living room, they were waiting near the door. I'll arrange transportation, Cedric said. I already have, she replied. He frowned. When? This morning? A small shift. He had not expected that. The timeline he had constructed had not accounted for her having her own morning. At the door, she paused. Not to look at Simone, not to look at the apartment, to look at Cedric. Just once. You're certain? Mashi asked, the only question she gave him. He held her gaze. Yes. She nodded. Then this is simple. She opened the door. The hallway was quiet. She stepped through it without assistance, without announcement, without resistance. Behind her, the door closed softly. Cedric exhaled. Outside, Imani adjusted the strap of her bag. Her body was heavier with each step than she would have liked, but her pace was steady. Because what Cedric had just done, what he believed was an ending, was in truth the last action he would ever fully control. The hotel was not the kind that announced itself. It occupied a quiet street far enough from the city center to be unremarkable, which was exactly what James Holloway had arranged, understanding that the next phase of Imani's life required space that did not amplify transition. And her room was on the 5th floor, compact, clean. A desk near the window, a chair, a small kitchenette, a bed designed for passing through rather than settling into. Imani closed the door behind her. She stood still for a moment. This silence was different from the silence of the apartment she had just left. That silence had been owned, curated, shaped by absence. This silence was unclaimed. She crossed to the chair and sat, not from exhaustion, from necessity. The fatigue that followed emotional effort was its own specific currency, and she had learned to spend it wisely. She opened the notebook, turned to the new section she had started that morning. She paused, then added, "Do not respond emotionally. Not a reminder, a principle." James Holloway called at 11. Their secure video conference was efficient and without theatrics. And he appeared on her screen from a New York office lined with dark shelves, a man who looked less dazzled by wealth than accustomed to protecting it from people who mistook access for entitlement. "Before we proceed with formal transition," he said, Are there any active legal or financial vulnerabilities in your current personal life that could intersect with the estate? Yes, she said. He did not react visibly, but something in his posture sharpened. My husband has been moving money, she continued. Some from joint accounts, some through channels I haven't fully identified. There's also a third party. Do you have documentation? She glanced at the notebook. Some. Not complete. Then our immediate priority is separation and preservation. Your inherited assets need to remain entirely outside any potential claim structure. And we need a parallel review of what has already occurred in your marital finances. He expanded the conference. A second face appeared on screen. This is Elena Park, James said. Forensic accounting. Elena was composed, unsentiment, with the kind of attention that moved quickly without becoming scattered. Good morning, she said. I'll need access to any records you already have. Statements, emails, billing irregularities, screenshots, timelines, anything you documented. I have a written log, Imani said. Elena's eyes shifted. How detailed? Dates, times, charges, absences, behavioral changes, names where identifiable. A pause. Then, that helps more than most people realize. Imani did not find this surprising. Most people remembered feelings. Few remembered sequence. By noon, she had granted Elena's team limited access to her existing documents. By 2 in the afternoon, Elena had sent a preliminary summary. Imani read it at the desk, the city pale and gray outside the window. The summary was structured, precise, absent of interpretation, joint account activity over 12 months, flagged transactions, small individual withdrawals, $2,000, $3,000, $1,500, amounts that aligned with normal discretionary spending when viewed alone. Combined total, $19,400. Imani opened her notebook, cross-referenced with her own records. The alignment was almost exact, not because Cedric had been sloppy, because secrecy, repeated often enough, becomes dependent on routine, and routine, once observed, becomes traceable. A second section, the third-party benefit. Payments routed through a Delaware LLC called Northgate Advisory, monthly lease payments for a residential unit in Lincoln Park, $8,400 per month, retail and dining charges consistent with maintaining a separate lifestyle. Imani wrote the LLC name down, cross-referenced with dates, confirmed. The lease for Simone Clark's apartment had been paid with Imani's money, for 11 months. She sat with that for a moment. Then she continued reading. The third section came with a note from Elena. Potential unauthorized access. Several transactions executed from joint account during periods of documented hospitalization. Timestamps overlap with medical records suggesting account holder was not conscious. Imani read that 3 times, not from disbelief, from the need to understand scale. And this was no longer neglect. This was not simply the financial expression of departure. This was use, systematic, intentional. During the hours when she had been unconscious, during the hours when her only concern had been surviving her own body, he had been moving her money. She wrote in the notebook, access exploited during medical incapacitation, underlined it once, not for emphasis, for classification. Her phone vibrated. Cedric, calling. She let it ring. Voicemail followed. She listened once. His voice was smoother than she expected. The voice of a man who believed the matter remained administrative. Imani. Just checking in? You haven't responded? We should probably speak. Practically, if nothing else. There are details to sort out. Practically. Always practically. She saved the audio, archived it, opened the notebook. De wrote, he is transitioning from removal to management. Beneath it, management will become retrieval if threatened. She looked at that sentence for a long time. Then she turned off the lamp and let the room fall into quiet. Because what Cedric had done was not one decision made in one cruel morning. It was a pattern. And patterns, once documented, did not collapse from outrage. They collapsed from presentation. The financial records arrived in layers, not as a single revelation, but as a sequence of confirmations, each one building upon the previous until the structure was complete enough to be irrefutable. Elena Park did not send conclusions. She sent data. The first phase summary landed in Imani's email at 8:30 in the morning, 3 days into the hotel stay. She opened it at the desk with her medication arranged and her tea already cold, a habit she had developed, always medication first, then whatever came next. The document began with the overview. 12 months of joint account activity. Flagged transactions sorted by category. Category 1. Gradual extraction. The methodology was precise. Small withdrawals executed during periods of reduced co-account visibility. Evenings when Imani was in treatment, days when she was hospitalized, the specific windows when her attention was necessarily directed elsewhere. Combined across 12 months, $19,400. Imani tracked each entry against her notebook. The alignment was nearly perfect. Every significant withdrawal corresponded to a date she had documented as an evening Cedric had returned late, and a day he had been traveling, a moment she had been medicated into rest. He had not been impulsive. He had been scheduled. Category 2, third-party benefit. This section was longer and more detailed. Northgate Advisory, LLC, registered in Delaware, beneficial ownership pending full trace. Monthly transfers routed through the LLC to an account linked to a residential lease, Lincoln Park. $8,400 per month for 11 months. Utilities, furnishings, high-end retail, travel, all consistent with maintaining a separate domestic life for one adult woman. Imani wrote the total without emphasis, $92,400. Cedric had used her money to fund Simone Clark's life for nearly a year, while she was in treatment. Category 3 came with Elena's personal note attached, and this section requires careful attention. Several transactions had been executed using digital authorization that corresponded to Imani's login credentials. The timestamps of those transactions overlapped precisely with her hospital records. She had not been conscious. Someone had used her credentials to access the account during her hospitalization. Elena's note was restrained. Further verification required, but pattern is consistent with unauthorized use of a co-account holder's access credentials during periods of medical incapacitation. Imani read the section twice, then a third time. Then she called James Holloway. "I've reviewed Elena's third category," she said. "Yes." His voice was careful. "This is no longer only a marital financial dispute." "No," James agreed. "It is not." A pause. "I've already been in contact with Daniel Reeves, a family law attorney in Chicago who specializes in cases of this nature. He's reviewed the preliminary findings. He's ready to meet whenever you are." "Today," she said. "I thought you might say that." Daniel Reeves was not the kind of attorney who performed reassurance. He was the kind who prepared. Their video conference was the most efficient conversation Imani had had in years. "Given what Elena has found," he said, "we are looking at unauthorized access to financial accounts, systematic withdrawal using exploited access credentials, third-party benefit funded by marital assets without disclosure, and strong indicators of premeditated planning dating back at least 14 months. "Can we establish the planning timeline?" Imani asked. "That's what I want to ask you," Daniel replied. "Ma, you mentioned behavioral changes approximately 14 months ago. Can you be more specific?" She opened the notebook. For the next 40 minutes, she walked him through every entry: dates, times, charges, absences. The language changes, the way Cedric's vocabulary had shifted from partnership to management. The second phone, the hotel terrace, the LLC, the laptop access during hospitalization. When she finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. "How long did you maintain this record?" he asked. 14 months, she said. "And it was consistent? Regular?" "I treated it as an operational log," she replied. "I documented what I observed without interpretation." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Miss Carter," he said, using her name the way James always did. Carter, not Wittmann. Oh, as though they had understood from the beginning which version of her would be standing at the end of this. In 20 years of practice, I have rarely seen documentation of this quality from someone who was not a legal professional. Imani did not respond to that. "What do we need to file?" she asked. "We file for dissolution with financial misconduct claims," Daniel said. "We request immediate protective orders on all joint and accessible accounts. We request full financial disclosure from him within the statutory window, and given Elena's third category findings, we refer potential criminal elements to the appropriate authorities." "When?" 48 hours, Daniel said. "I can be ready in 48 hours. "So can I," she said. She meant it. She had been ready for 14 months. Now she had simply been waiting for the right structure to move within. Her phone vibrated. Cedric again. She watched the screen. Did not answer. Waited for the voicemail. "Imani, I've been thinking. I know this has been difficult. I want to be fair. I've always wanted to be fair. Can we just talk? Before lawyers get involved? Before lawyers get involved." The timing of that sentence was not coincidental. He was beginning to sense movement, not the specific shape of it. Not yet. Just the vibration of something shifting in the structure around him. She archived the voicemail, opened the notebook. He senses movement. Below it, "Do not interrupt his miscalculation." She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, allowed the room to settle into dark. Because in 48 hours, the structure she had been building across 14 months of quiet documentation would move into process. And process, unlike conversation, did not ask for his cooperation. The filing happened in silence. At 9:22 in the morning, Daniel submitted the petition electronically. Documents moving from one secured server to another, time-stamped, indexed, entered into a structure designed to hold disputes without requiring emotion to carry them. By 9:30, the case existed formally. Imani did not watch the submission. She sat at the desk, her hands resting lightly on either side of the notebook, aware of the moment without needing to witness it directly. The act itself did not require her presence. What mattered had already been assembled. Daniel called at 9:45. "It's done," he said. "What happens next? Service will be completed today. Once he receives notice, we can expect immediate response through his own counsel. We've included requests for financial disclosure, account restrictions, and preservation orders. Given Elena's findings, the court should grant interim protections quickly. And the unauthorized access category? That goes to a different desk," Daniel said carefully. "It's out of my lane now, but the referral has been made. Imani absorbed that. Understood. One more thing," Daniel added. "Given the scale of the financial discrepancies, we may be looking at consequences beyond divorce proceedings." She did not ask him to clarify. She understood. Cedric's response came at 11:43, not a call, a message, short, and the specific brevity of someone who has been surprised but is attempting to project control. "What is this, Imani? I just received legal notice. This was completely unnecessary. We could have handled this privately." Privately. The word had changed meaning. Before it had suggested discretion. Now it suggested containment. She read it once, then again, forwarded it to Daniel without comment. Another message followed within minutes. "Call me. We can resolve this without making it bigger than it needs to be." Then, "This isn't what I wanted." Imani looked at the screen. This isn't what I wanted. Not what she wanted. Not what they could have prevented. Not what he had caused. What he wanted. She closed the messages, opened the notebook, wrote, "Post-filing reaction, confusion, assertion, pressure. Below it, still framing as escalation. It's still unaware of inheritance. That last line remained the most important, because Cedric believed this was a dispute over shared assets, over inconvenience, over separation. He did not yet understand he was no longer operating within the same scale. Pause. Simone entered the picture again that afternoon. A message from an unknown number, but the tone was unmistakably hers. Imani, I don't know what you think you're doing. David was trying to be fair. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Imani read it once, deleted it, not from anger, from irrelevance. Simone did not belong in the structure Imani was building, and anything outside that structure did not need to be retained. By evening, Cedric's messages had shifted again. The controlled tone was gone. Imani, please, just the word. No framing, no logic, no management language. Just that. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned away, opened the notebook, wrote, "Control shifting. He is moving from strategy to reaction." She closed it, turned off the lamp. The process was in motion. It did not require her engagement to continue. It required only time. The audio file did not arrive with urgency. It did not need to. By the time Elena's team sent it over, the structure of Cedric's behavior had already been established through transactions, timelines, and partial communications. But there remained a distinction between pattern and voice. Numbers demonstrated intention. Language revealed mindset. The file came through a secure transfer link. A short note from Elena accompanied it. Recovered from device cache. External sync overlap. Quality partial but usable. The legal team to confirm admissibility. Imani did not open it immediately. She let the notification sit on screen while she finished cross-referencing the last set of financial entries, aligning timestamps, confirming patterns, completing the documentation that had preceded everything. Only after that did she return to the file. She pressed play, background noise first, movement, the low ambient hum of what might have been a restaurant or private lounge, then Cedric's voice, clearer than she expected. "I'm telling you, it's already moving in that direction." A pause. Then Simone's voice. "And she doesn't suspect anything? Not anxious, curious, clinical? She's focused on her treatment," Cedric replied. "Most days she barely leaves the room. It's not something she's tracking." Imani did not move. Her hand rested lightly against the edge of the desk. Simone spoke again. "And the accounts?" "They're fine," Cedric said. "I've been careful. Nothing that would raise a flag unless someone went looking. And there's no reason she would." A brief shift in the audio. The sound of glass against a surface. "Once things stabilize," Cedric continued, "it will be easier to transition everything cleanly. No need to complicate it early." Imani had seen that phrase before. In the tablet recovery. No need to complicate things early. And now, in his voice. In his tone. The calm assurance of a man who believed he was managing a process, not dismantling a life. Simone's response came after a short pause. And what if she doesn't stabilize? The question was incomplete. Its meaning was not. Cedric did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice lowered slightly. And then it simplifies things further. The words were delivered without emphasis, without strain, as though they belonged within the same logical framework as every other decision he had been describing. Imani let the file play through to the end. Then she sat in the quiet of the room for a long time. She reached for the notebook. Wrote, "Audio evidence confirms premeditated financial extraction and planned removal." Beneath it, language consistent with prior fragments. Then, "He demonstrates awareness of wrongdoing," underlined once, for classification. She forwarded the file to Daniel and James, attached a single line, "Audio file received. Please review for admissibility." Daniel responded within 20 minutes. "This is significant. Content strongly supports intent. We will verify chain of custody, James replied shortly after. I do not distribute further. This will materially affect proceedings. She archived both responses. Then she looked out the window. The city below moved as it always did. Unaware, unchanged. In a private lounge somewhere in that city, on a night she had documented without knowing the full shape of what she was recording, Cedric Wittmann had spoken casually about the death of his wife. Not dramatically, not with visible cruelty. With the calm efficiency of a man who had decided that her life was a variable in his calculation. And he had said it in his own voice. And it had been recorded. And it would be heard. The deposition was scheduled without ceremony. By the time it arrived, both legal teams had exchanged preliminary disclosures and formal positions. What remained was not discovery, it was confirmation, structured, controlled, and permanent. Imani was seated in a private conference room arranged by Daniel's firm, the space intentionally neutral, a single table, a recording system, the quiet presence of process. Cedric appeared on screen accompanied by his attorney, a composed woman in her late 40s who positioned herself with the specific attentiveness of someone prepared to intervene. Cedric himself looked unchanged at first glance. Well-dressed. Controlled posture aligned with the version of himself he had always presented. But something in the stillness of his expression suggested tension held just beneath the surface. Imani observed without reaction. She had taken her place at the table with the same measured composure she had maintained throughout the process. The notebook rested closed beside her. Not because she needed it, and because it represented the continuity of everything that had led to this moment. Daniel's methodology was precise. Establish baseline, confirm known facts, introduce deviation. Mr. Wittmann, can you confirm that you maintained joint financial accounts with Miss Carter during the course of your marriage? Yes. Can you confirm you had authorized access to those accounts during the period between January of last year and the present? Yes. During that same period, were you aware of any significant changes in Miss Carter's health condition that affected her ability to actively monitor financial activity? Cedric hesitated briefly. She was undergoing treatment. There were periods where she was less involved. Less involved, Daniel repeated. Not as correction, as reinforcement. Would it be accurate to say there were times when she was physically unable to review account activity? I suppose that could be the case. Daniel introduced the first document, the withdrawal summary. Can you explain the purpose of these transactions? They fall within normal discretionary spending. Daniel allowed that to settle, then introduced the aggregated total, $19,400 over 12 months. Do you still consider this normal? When viewed collectively, it may appear larger. But these were not unauthorized. Understood. Daniel nodded. Let's look at where the funds were directed. Northgate Advisory, the residential lease, 11 months, $92,000. Are you familiar with this entity? Yes. Can you describe its purpose? It's a consulting structure used for various engagements. Does that include residential lease payments for a Lincoln Park property? A pause. Yes. Who resides at that property? The pause was longer. Simone Clark. Her name entered the record, without emphasis, without reaction, simply placed. Were funds from your joint account used to support that residence? Yes. Was Miss Carter aware of that use? No. Daniel allowed the silence to extend. Then he introduced the authorization logs, the timestamps, the medical records. Can you confirm whether you accessed the joint account on these dates? Yes. Were you aware that Miss Carter was hospitalized during several of those periods? I was aware she was receiving treatment. Were you aware she was not conscious during at least 2 of those transactions? I don't recall the exact details. Daniel nodded, moved forward. The audio transcript appeared on screen, his key lines highlighted, Once she stabilizes, no need to complicate it early, then it simplifies things further. Can you confirm this is your voice? Cedric looked at the transcript, then at his attorney, then at the screen. Yes. Can you explain what you meant by simplifies things further? A pause. Longer than any previous. It was a general statement, taken out of context. What context would make that statement appropriate? No answer. His attorney intervened. We'll need to review the full audio before providing interpretation. Daniel accepted without resistance. Understood. We'll return to that. The questioning continued. Each piece introduced not as accusation, as structure. Each response recorded, compared, aligned. Imani remained silent throughout. Her presence was not passive, it was constant. She observed Cedric's responses not for emotion but for consistency. The moments where his answers aligned, the moments where they shifted, the moments where absence of clarity spoke more than any statement. By the time the session concluded, the structure was complete. Not emotionally, legally, financially, logically. Cedric had not confessed. He had not needed to. He had confirmed, through answers, through omissions, through alignment with records he could not alter. After the session ended, Imani closed her eyes briefly. Not from exhaustion, from completion. When she opened them, the room was unchanged. But the distance between what had been known and what had been proven had disappeared. She reached for the notebook, wrote, "Deposition complete. Confirmation achieved." Below it, no contradiction strong enough to disrupt structure. So she closed it, set it beside her. Let the silence return. Because what had happened in that room was not confrontation, it was conclusion in motion. And once motion began within that structure, it did not reverse. The formal reading of the will took place in a secured video conference arranged by Holloway and Associates. No ceremony, no gathered relatives, no table designed for reaction. Vera Carter had not built her life around spectacle. She did not allow it in death. Imani sat at the desk in her hotel room. Water to her right, notebook to her left. James appeared on screen, flanked by a second attorney and a compliance officer whose role was observation, not participation. The process was methodical. Identity verification, documentation review, facial confirmation. At no point did anyone rush her. And when all verification was complete, James folded his hands. We are proceeding with the formal reading of the last will and testament of Vera Marie Carter. He read without embellishment. Vera Carter had left the majority of her estate to Imani Marie Carter, not in fragments, not in conditional increments, in control. Carter Medical Group, 68% controlling interest. All voting rights transferred upon execution. Real estate assets consolidated under 4 trust structures, all naming Imani as primary beneficiary and sole decision authority. Liquid assets in managed accounts with immediate access upon final verification, and protective clauses not to restrict Imani, but to prevent external interference during the transition period. No spousal claims could attach retroactively to inherited assets. And no forced liquidation without her consent. No third-party access without multi-tier approval. Vera Carter had built not only wealth, she had built insulation. When James finished reading, he did not look at Imani immediately. He allowed the silence to hold, not for grief, for processing. "Do you have any questions?" he asked. "The operational structure," Imani said. "Carter Medical Group, how centralized is decision-making at the executive level?" James did not smile, but something in his expression shifted. "Recognition. Currently, the company is overseen by an interim board," he said. "With your controlling interest, you have authority to restructure leadership at your discretion." "Immediately?" "Yes." "And public disclosure?" The second attorney, Laura, replied, "There is a required filing window, but we can control the timing within that range." Imani's gaze dropped briefly to the notebook. "Delay it," she said. "How long?" James asked. "As long as legally permissible." James and Laura exchanged a brief glance. That can be arranged. There were no further questions because Imani did not need reassurance. She needed alignment. When the session ended, she opened the notebook, wrote, "Control confirmed." Below it, "Maintain non-disclosure." Then, "Proceed with parallel legal action." Her phone rang almost immediately. Daniel Reeves. "We're ready to file," he said without preamble. "Yes," she said. "Once he's served, behavior will shift," Daniel continued. "Expect increased contact attempts, possible overtures toward reconciliation, possibly through Simone. I understand. And Imani—" He paused, the use of her first name deliberate. "This is going to resolve exactly as it should. You have built something here that most attorneys spend careers trying to construct." She did not respond to that, because it was not something she had been building. It was something she had been living, and living carefully, and recording honestly. And that, more than strategy, more than inheritance, more than anything that had arrived in a phone call at 9:17 in the morning, was what had made everything that followed possible. The judgment did not arrive with spectacle. It was issued through the same system that had carried every prior step. Documents reviewed, arguments evaluated, evidence weighed without interruption or performance. Imani received the notice in the late afternoon, an email, concise. While she opened it at the desk where every stage of the process had unfolded. The marriage between Imani Marie Carter and Cedric James Wittmann was legally dissolved. She read that line once, then continued. Financial determinations followed. Cedric was found responsible for unauthorized use of joint assets, full restitution ordered based on verified transactions. The court recognized a pattern of concealed financial behavior, documented transfers, account access logs, corroborating communication evidence including the audio recording, which had been deemed admissible. The residential property presented as exclusively his was reevaluated within the broader financial structure. Its associated value, along with other shared holdings, was redistributed in accordance with equitable division adjusted to reflect documented misconduct. The protective orders remained in place. Cedric was restricted from accessing or interfering with any accounts tied to Imani, whether past, present, or future. The referral regarding unauthorized access during hospitalization had been accepted by the appropriate authorities. That process would continue separately. Imani read the document completely, then closed it. Her hand rested briefly on the laptop. Then she picked up her phone. Daniel's name appeared. She answered. "It's finalized," he said. "Yes, you should receive confirmation of asset transfers within a few days. Everything is secured. No further exposure on your end." "Thank you." A pause. "Miss Carter," Daniel said. He only used the formal address when something needed weight. "I've been practicing family law for 18 years. What you built, the documentation, the patience, now the refusal to react before the structure was ready, I have never seen anything like it from someone who was not a legal professional." She looked at the window, the city below moving as it always moved, unaware, unchanged. "I was a woman managing a system," she said. "I just applied the same discipline." She meant it. She had not been building a legal case. She had been observing her own life clearly. And clarity, maintained long enough, becomes its own form of justice. James Holloway's message arrived shortly after. Estate transition complete. All protections intact. You are now fully in control. She read it once, set the phone down. Control, not dominance, stability, the ability to move forward without interference from what had already been resolved. She did not follow Cedric's aftermath, not from indifference, but from completion. The need to know had ended when the structure had been resolved. She had not sought to humiliate him publicly, had not sought to reverse the lobby scene with a dramatic counter scene, had not needed the world to watch him understand what he had lost. She had needed only for the truth to be entered into the record, and the record had done what records do. It had held. Her first visit to Carter Medical Group headquarters took place on a Monday morning. She arrived without announcement, not without preparation. She had spent 3 weeks reviewing every operational document James could provide: financial statements, board meeting minutes, organizational structure, strategic priorities. The particular language of a company that had been running on interim leadership for too long and was ready, and though it did not yet know it, for someone who spoke operations fluently. The building was in New York, understated in its exterior design, glass and steel arranged not to impress but to endure. Inside, the atmosphere reflected the same principle: efficient, controlled, absent of unnecessary display. People moved with purpose, systems functioning without visible strain. There were eyes on her as she moved through the lobby, not openly, but present. Michael Grant, whom James had assigned as her operational liaison, accompanied her. Not as an introduction, as continuity. In the executive conference room, the board was assembled. She took her seat at the head of the table. She did not begin with a statement of authority. She began with a question. Walk me through the current operational priorities for the next quarter. The room adjusted. And not dramatically, but noticeably. They had expected declaration. They received inquiry. One board member, a man in his 60s with the posture of someone accustomed to being heard, leaned forward slightly. We are currently focused on expanding our clinical research partnerships, particularly in long-term treatment programs. Which programs? Imani asked. The discussion that followed was not immediate alignment. It was examination. Each answer led to another question. Each explanation was met with clarification, not as challenge, as structure. By the end of the meeting, no major decisions had been announced, but something had shifted, not in authority, in tone. The expectation of how decisions would be made had changed. After the meeting, Michael remained with her. You didn't assert control, he observed. Imani looked at the documents in front of her. Control doesn't require assertion, she said. In the weeks that followed, Imani established rhythm, not through visible change, through alignment, departments reviewed, processes examined, not for fault, for function. Where inefficiencies appeared, they were addressed without announcement. Where structures held, they were left intact. Her health remained a constant factor. There were days when her energy limited how long she could remain in the building. Days when decisions were made from her residence rather than the conference room. Meetings that had to be shortened. But the limitation did not disrupt the structure. It refined it. She delegated with precision, not out of weakness, out of clarity about where her attention was most needed. The organization adapted, and not because it was instructed to, because it recognized consistency. One evening, several weeks into the transition, Imani sat by the window of her New York residence. The city stretched outward beneath a sky that carried the last light of the day. Her phone was quiet, not because there was nothing to say, because there was no one left who needed to say it. Cedric's presence had receded completely, not gradually, not emotionally, structurally. There were no messages, no attempts at contact, no indirect pressure. Whatever remained of him existed outside the system she now occupied, not erased, irrelevant. She opened the notebook, turned to a blank page. For a moment, she did not write, not because she had nothing to record, because she no longer needed to translate her life into documentation in order to understand it. The documentation had served its purpose. The purpose was complete. Still, after a moment, she placed the pen to the page. Stability established. Simple, present, accurate. She closed the notebook, set it aside, leaned back slightly in the chair. She had not raised her voice. She had not argued. She had not sought to reverse what had happened in the lobby with a counter scene designed for an audience. She had allowed truth to move through structure, and when it had reached its conclusion, she had stepped forward, not loudly, not publicly, but completely. And in that completeness, in the specific, earned, unspectacular completeness of a woman who had documented her own life clearly enough that it could speak for itself, there was something that did not require recognition to exist. It simply was, and it would remain for a year after the lobby. She was 44 years old. Carter Medical Group had completed its most profitable quarter in 7 years. 3 new clinical research partnerships had been established under her leadership. The interim board had been restructured, not dramatically, precisely, replacing positions that had been held by comfort rather than competence with people who understood operations as a discipline rather than a status. The real estate portfolio had been reorganized to generate sustainable yield rather than speculative growth. Her health remained managed, not resolved, not reversed, managed, which was what it had always been, what it would always be, that which was something she had made peace with in the specific way of someone who has decided that the terms of their life are theirs to define regardless of what the terms are. She had moved into a permanent residence in New York, not large, not ostentatious. Light entered the space evenly. The rooms were not excessive. Nothing extended beyond what was needed. She kept the same desk, the same chair, the same notebook, though she wrote in it less frequently now. Dara visited in October. They sat on the terrace in the late afternoon with the city below them, and the kind of silence that belongs to people who have known each other long enough that silence is a form of conversation. "How are you, really?" Dara asked. Imani thought about it, not performing the consideration, actually considering. "I'm well," she said. "In a specific way I haven't been in a very long time." "Not happy?" "Happy is a weather system," Imani said. "It comes and goes. What I am is oriented. I know where I am. I know what I'm building. I know what it's for." A pause. That feels more stable than happy. Dara looked at her for a long moment. "I told you 2 years ago that he was already gone." "You did. And you stayed." "I stayed until I was ready to leave," Imani said. "Those aren't the same thing." Dara was quiet. "The documentation," she said finally. "The notebook, the financial tracking, all of it. Did you know when you started that it would lead here?" Imani looked at the city. "I knew I needed to understand what was happening clearly," she said. "I didn't know the inheritance was coming. I didn't know the audio existed. I didn't know what structure the truth would build itself into." A pause. "I just knew that clarity was the only thing I could rely on, so I maintained it, even when it cost you, especially then." Dara nodded slowly, then said, "Vera Carter was right about you." Imani looked at her. "The temperament required to oversee what she built," Dara continued. "That's what James said she wrote. I've been thinking about that phrase for months." She met Imani's eyes. "You always had it. The illness didn't give it to you. The marriage didn't give it to you. You had it before any of that." Imani was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "Not from pride, from recognition. I just forgot for a while." She looked back at the city. The light was changing, the afternoon moving toward evening. The specific shift of gold into gray that she had always found beautiful, even when everything else was difficult. She had built something from the clarity she had maintained, not because of the inheritance. The inheritance was the medium. The foundation was the notebook, the discipline of observing her own life clearly and recording it honestly. The refusal to let pain become the primary fact of her experience when evidence was available. The understanding that truth, documented carefully, did not require permission to exist. She had known this before Cedric. She had known it in her years of operations management, in the hospital network, in the discipline of systems that functioned because someone had been willing to see them clearly. She had simply needed the worst thing that had ever been done to her to remind her. And it had. There is a kind of strength that does not need witnesses. And Imani Wittmann never stood in front of the world to announce her victory. She never returned to the marble lobby with cameras rolling and an audience assembled. She never sent Cedric a message that said, "Now you know." She did not need to. Because what she had built, across 14 months of careful documentation, across the slow and methodical process of allowing truth to move through structure, had never been about him. It had been about her, about the clarity she had maintained when everything else was being taken, about the discipline of observing her own life honestly when the person beside her was working to make her doubt her own perception, about the understanding that what is documented carefully does not require anyone's belief to be real. The most dangerous thing that was done to Imani was not the financial exploitation. It was not the other woman. It was not even the lobby. The most dangerous thing was the years before the lobby, the slow, gradual erosion of the belief that what she observed was worth recording, that what she felt was worth trusting, that what she was building, in quiet, in the margins, in the hours when her illness had narrowed her world to a single room, was worth protecting. She protected it anyway. And that protection became everything. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something in it, I need you to do something. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter and need to reach the people who need them. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Hey, tell me if you have had your own version of a marble lobby. A moment when someone reduced you to a sentence and believed that sentence was final. Tell me if you are building something right now that the people around you do not see yet. I read every comment, every one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is being told that what they observe is not real, someone who is keeping their own quiet record and wondering if it matters. It matters. And subscribe. Turn on notifications, because every week I bring you stories of people who maintained clarity when clarity was the hardest thing to maintain, and found on the other side of it exactly what they had always been building toward. I will see you in the next one.